Hello, this is Chapter 10, Micro Lecture number 3. We're going to finish up the muscular system with the muscle groups of the lower body. So this is just going to finish up all the muscles that we've gone through so far in this class. So we're going to name and locate the muscles that act on the hip, then the knee, the ankle, and then the toe. We're not really going to focus on the toe, but we are going to look at the hip, knee, and ankle. We're going to relate the actions of these muscles to the joint movements that we described earlier in Chapter 9. We're going to look at the origin, where they come from, the insertion, the part that moves, and then the innervation, or the nerve that acts on each muscle. And this is important because if you understand the innervation of each muscle, you can understand if you have some type of damage with that nerve, or tracing it back to the spinal root, or even the brain, you would be able to determine, is it neuronal from the brain, spinal cord, or further downstream. So it's important to know origin, insertion, and innervation for every muscle. So let's look at them. The anterior muscles of the hip, the iliacus and the psoas major. So the iliacus is what is going to flex the thigh at the hip, and the iliacus portion arises from the iliac crest and the fossa. So the iliacus, and then you have the psoas major. Psoas major, you can see, is going to flex the hip at the thigh, and it rises all the way from the lumbar vertebrae. And if you look, they're all going to have the same tendon where they come down, where they're all going to go down to the lesser trochanter of the femur. Now we have some in red. The tensor fascia lata is going to extend the knee laterally and rotates the knee. More importantly, it's going to tense the iliotibial band. The gluteus maximus, you've all heard of that. It's the big one right back here. This forms the mass of the buttocks, the prime hip extensor, and provides most of the lift when you climb the stairs. It's going to be the gluteus maximus. And the gluteus medius and minimus you can't see, but the medius is the one up here that's going to be right below the iliac crest, and the minimus is just going to be just below it into that little indentation. But these are going to adduct and medial rotate the thigh. You're also going to have 5 muscles that act primarily adductors of the thigh. The 2 I really want you to look at, the adductor magnus and the gracilis. The adductor magnus is the big one that's going to go right to the pubic bone, almost to the top of the femur, just below the lesser trochanter. And then the gracilis is going to run the entire length. You can kind of see it, but it's just going to be right there. It runs all the way from the pubic all the way down to the medial condyle. And that's how it's going to adduct, because remember, adduct is bringing it back to the midline. Now we're going to look at the muscles acting on the knee and the leg, but these are going to be the extensors. So some books call the quadriceps femoris muscle, but for the most part, the quadriceps femoris muscle is 4 individual muscles. Quadricep 4. Rectus femoris running down the middle, vastus lateralis running down the lateral side, vastus medialis running down the medial portion of it, and the vastus intermedialis is going to be the one just behind the rectus femoris. They all converge in a single quadriceps patellar tendon. Quadriceps for these 4 muscles, patella because of the kneecap. They extends to the patella, then continue as a patellar ligament and inserts on the tibial tuberosity. So this kind of forms, or starts forming, your knee. And also the sartorius. It's the longest muscle in the body. This is called the Taylor's muscle, and I'll show you on this next slide. So this kind of shows you the picture of where all those muscles are, those 5 muscles. You have the sartorius right here, and it's the longest muscle because it goes all the way from the iliac crest all the way to the medial portion of the tibia. So it's the longest muscle in the body because the femur is the longest bone. You have the rectus femoris running down the front. You have the vastus medialis going medial, vastus lateralis going lateral, and the vastus intermedialis is just the one right behind it. All of them converge into this one tendon with the patella and then going on to the tibial tuberosity. Now we're going to look at the knee and the leg. So we're going to have the biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. If you think about this, they're going to be called the hamstring muscles. You've probably never really thought about this, hamstrings, but when they used to slaughter pork or pigs, what they did is they took these three muscles. They took the semimembranosus, semitendinosus, so membranosus is over here, tendinosus T for top, and the biceps right there. They took those three muscles and then they put a hook and then they lift the pork or the pig up and then they cut it so all the blood would drain out of it. And because they were strings for a pig, they were called hamstrings. Now let's move on to the foot. So if we break these down into front and then the back, they become a little bit easier to look at. But the anterior, or the front, are going to be extensors. The posterior are going to be different. So they dorsal flex the ankle, prevent the toe from scuffing when walking. The biggest one, and the one I really want you to memorize, is the tibialis anterior. And the tibialis anterior is the big one, which is right on top of the tibia, right there. And then the ones on the back, posterior compartment, pretty much gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius makes up the entire part of your calf. You also have the soleus, which is just underneath the gastrocnemius, and the plantaris. These are much smaller than just knowing the gastrocnemius will go into the calcaneal tendon, and then that's also your Achilles tendon. But for some reason, teachers and doctors want you to start using calcaneal tendon instead of Achilles, so you'll go gastrocnemius goes into the calcaneal tendon. You also have other really small ones that we're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but the popliteus, if that ever came up, you know that has to deal with the popliteal ligament, the popliteus, and all the other things in the back of the knee, which just act on the knee and gives a little bit of support. Tibialis posterior is going to be the opposite of the anterior, and it's going to be running down the tibia. But these are very small and just provide some support back and forth and rocking of the ankle and the foot. And then again, just to kind of point out the calcaneal tendon, which is cut, you can see how all of those kind of go down and provide all of that support in the ankle. Nothing really to memorize, but just kind of know this is where your ankle is going to be supported. So if you twist your ankle or you damage the ankle and it becomes black and blue, it's all those burst blood vessels from all of those muscles and ligament. And then the foot. So you're going to have 4 ventral muscular layers. They're going to support for the arches. One's going to be dorsal muscles. But for the most part, the arches are going to be down here, and it's going to abduct and adduct the toes, flexes the toes. All of these are very tiny. I'm not going to make you memorize them. And then on the dorsal ones, they're the ones up here, also very small. And these are going to extend the toes and help you move your toes a little bit. But even if you're kind of moving your toes right now as I'm talking about this lecture, you know there's not a lot of movement in the toes and the foot. And most of the time, you care about athletic injuries because this is what you're going to come across in your life or in the hospital setting. So muscles and tendons are very vulnerable to sudden and intense stress. So if you stretch, you have the proper conditioning, you warm up those muscles, and then you warm up those ligaments. And after this lecture, you kind of know it's not just the muscles that you need to warm up. It's not just the tendons from the muscle to the bones. It's that burses that need to be warmed up, and so that movement between the muscles is really smooth. And the most common injuries, compartment syndrome, is when the different compartments will then become inflamed. Shin splints on the front with the tibialis anterior. You can pull the hamstrings, the ones in the back. You can also have tennis elbow in the elbow. You can pull the groin, and then you can also have the most important one, that you hear over and over again is the rotator cuff with the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. And with most of them, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And the thing is, rest, ice, and compression, you want the blood to get back in there. You want the blood to start producing all the corrective measures that the body's going to need to build muscle fibers, to build the tendons back up, to then provide the environment so those tissues that were damaged can be regenerated. So that no pain, no gain is a very dangerous misconception, because if you keep having pain over and over and over again, can lead to very, very, very severe injuries. And that concludes Chapter 10 and the muscles. Good luck.